These are hawberries, the fruits of the hawthorn tree. So earlier in the year we looked at harvesting the edible leaf buds and then the flowers, and now we can harvest the berries. They're not sweet like a lot of berries are. In fact, they're most often compared to avocado, which I think is fairly similar, more in the texture than the flavour. I like nibbling on them as a trailside snack, and they're very nutritious and a good source of antioxidants. It's supposed to be very good for heart health and improving circulation and boosting the immune system. There's not really much flesh on them. They've got a big seed in the middle and then are surrounded by flesh, but you don't get much on them. So I don't really do much with hawberries apart from eat them as a snack on the go. But the other good use for them is making ketchup. A few years ago I made a Bloody Mary hawberry ketchup with vodka, Tabasco and Worcestershire sauce, which was really good. So keep an eye out for hawthorn bushes around the edges of fields. Farmers use them to keep livestock in because they make good hedging, and they're covered in really nasty thorns, so be careful when you're picking the fruits. These are Dryad saddle, an edible mushroom, though you only really want to eat them at their young stage. These ones here are absolutely perfect, but any bigger than this and they start becoming tough and fibrous. You can still eat them at that stage, but then they're best dried and powdered and used as a stock. But these are quite an underrated mushroom in my opinion. I think probably because people have tried eating them when they're tough and fibrous, but at this stage they're quite nice and tender, and they don't have much of a flavour. They're just quite mushroomy. I just quite like them pan fried or roasted. So these are actually a really common mushroom, and they've got a long growing season. You can find them from March all the way through sort of spring, summer and into early autumn. But I find the best time for them is around August, towards the end of their season. That's when you get the best flushes, and you do get some really big flushes. I've seen this mushroom take over whole fallen trees before. You can find them on most types of deciduous wood, either dead or dying, but especially on elm, beech, ash, willow and sycamore. These can grow really large, even up to like 50 centimetres across, and the caps are either circular or semicircular, and you'll see why it gets one of its common names, pheasant's back, because there's concentric brown rings on the cap which kind of look like pheasant's feathers. So there's two types of mushrooms that people send me pictures of quite a lot, asking me if they're chicken of the woods, and this is one of them. The other one I'll talk about next. Now to me they don't really look like chicken of the woods, but because they're a polypore mushroom, which means they grow out of the wood at 90 degrees and they've got pores instead of gills, you can see why there's some sort of confusion. Also the fact the colour is fairly similar. These are a light brown, whereas chicken of the woods are a sulphurous yellow. In fact, I've got some here. So you'll see chicken of the woods hasn't got the pheasant's feather sort of pattern on the top, and it's a much more sulphurous yellow, especially on the pores and at the edge of the cap, whereas pheasant's back or Dryad saddle was kind of a lighter margin. These are sulphurous yellow. And they're both edible anyway, so it's not a big problem if you get them confused. It's a fairly safe mushroom for beginners because there's not really anything that you'll confuse it for, especially if it's growing out of wood, like I said, at 90-degree angles, and it's got pores instead of gills, and it's got the pheasant feather pattern on top. Then there's nothing that you'll confuse that with. So the cap is attached to the wood by a fairly thick stem, and the stem usually goes quite black right at the base where it's attached to the wood. And the pores underneath are white, and eventually they'll go a yellowy light brown colour as it matures. And the pores run decurrently down the stem, so that means they don't just stop where the cap ends, they carry on all the way down the stem here. As these ones are in perfect condition, I'm going to take a couple of them home for my dinner. So when they're younger, they've got a nice firm white flesh, and it's got a quite fruity smell, almost like watermelon. In fact, this one really smells like watermelon. As the mushroom matures, that flesh will go a pale sort of tan brown colour, and it will go quite firm and corky, but this is quite nice and soft at the moment, so that is perfect for eating. This is a blackening polypore, also known as a giant polypore. It's not very giant at the moment, but this is the stage you want to pick it when it's still nice and young, and this is its best edible stage when it's still nice and soft. So this is a mushroom of late summer and autumn, and this is the other mushroom that I said can get confused with chicken of the woods. It's got a similar growth pattern to chicken of the woods. It grows in overlapping shelves, and it sometimes has a yellowish colour to it, but never the sulphur yellow of chicken of the woods. Giant polypore always grows at ground level, so either at the base of living trees or on stumps, and sometimes it can appear to be growing straight out the ground, but there'll be roots just below the surface that it's growing from. Giant polypore almost always grows on beech. So you can see I'm in a beech woodland here. So what I do this time of year, if I'm looking for blackening or giant polypore, is I find a beech woodland like this and look for stumps, and there's a very good chance that you'll find the mushrooms there. It's a parasitic fungi on living trees and becomes a saprobic fungi when the tree dies, and that's the sort of fungi that breaks down organic matter. On younger giant polypores like this, the edges are much more rounded and fatter. As the mushroom matures, they become thinner and flatter. And the cap has zonal colouring, usually in browns and greys, sometimes yellow, so you can see the different zonal marks of colours. And this mushroom is called giant polypore for a reason. It does grow huge when it matures fully. If I find a fully mature one in a few weeks, and I'll post it in a later video, but these can grow absolutely huge, and I've seen them grow all around stumps like this, and the whole fruiting body can grow to up to around 1 metre across. So on the underside of the mushroom, it's got white pores, and when damaged or bruised, they'll become brown and eventually black, which is where it gets its other name from, blackening polypore. They start to see it changing colour. It'll take a few minutes before it does start changing. The flesh is white and it's really fibrous. And the flesh also goes brown and then black when it's cut. As this mushroom grows at the base of trees, you don't want to harvest it from popular dog walking areas. The mature mushrooms are pretty much inedible as they become really tough, although the edges of mature mushrooms can still be eaten if they're soft. Giant polypore are okay pan fried, but they're better slow cooked. And this mushroom can cause stomach upsets with some people, so just like with chicken of the woods, it's a good idea to try a small amount if you're trying it for the first time. These are Japanese rose hips, Rosa rugosa. The hips of all rose species are edible, but Japanese rose hips are the best in my opinion. You'll mostly find them in urban environments in the UK, though you can occasionally find them growing wild. And you can find them by the coast as they've been planted to help prevent beach erosion, just like the sea buckthorn from last video. Japanese rose hips ripen a bit earlier than our native dog rose hips, and they're also quite a bit bigger, and they can be really sweet. They taste like extra sweet cherry tomatoes. They're good for making syrups or made into a fruit leather. They have seeds inside covered in hairs, which are an irritant and they need to be removed. If you're making a syrup, you can strain them out by passing the liquid through a muslin or a cheesecloth. But if you just want to eat them as they are, it's easy enough to cut them in half and rinse out the seeds under a tap. I like to have them in salads as a replacement for tomatoes. They are really delicious. They'll start to ripen in August and through the autumn. Like with many fruits, they are better after a frost, but you can simulate a frost by putting them in the freezer. Rose hips are very high in vitamin C. If cooking them, do it on a low heat so that you don't destroy the vitamins. This is Himalayan balsam. Although it's a nice looking plant, it's highly invasive here in the UK. And it causes problems because it can grow really tall and in dense clusters. So it can crowd out our native species, especially all along riverbanks. I've seen really thick patches of this. And that's where it likes to grow, in damp areas, so along rivers and in damp woodlands. The younger leaves and shoots can be eaten in spring, although they don't really have much of a flavour. The flowers are also edible. The best edible parts are the seed pods, like this here. You want to be extra careful not to help this plant spread. These seed pods, they've got like almost like a coiled spring inside, so when they're fully mature, any sort of tap or touch of these by maybe a passing animal or raindrops make the seeds fire out at quite a high rate. So especially when these plants are next to rivers, they can shoot their seeds into rivers and then help them spread further downriver. I found the best way to collect the seeds and the seed pods is to push several flower heads into a bag, give it a bit of a shake, and that way any of the mature seed pods will explode, so you're not firing the seeds all over the place then and helping them spread. And then any of the seed pods that are left are still immature, and then you can just pick those off individually. So the immature pods like this can be eaten raw, or you can cook them like pea pods. The mature seeds will go darker These can also be eaten and they have a nice nutty flavour. And just be extra careful not to help this plant spread, especially not letting any seeds get into rivers. Yet another use for common hogweed. This time of year I'm harvesting the seeds, and these taste almost exactly like cardamom. So I like to make a wild spice mix from common hogweed seeds and maybe carrot seeds and Alexander's, dried and made into a powder. And you can use these seeds for pretty much anything you'd use cardamom for. So maybe a spice blend for curries, or you can stir them through boiled rice to infuse the flavour. And these are also good infused into alcohols like gin. So as I've said before, you need to be extra careful with this plant. Make sure you can tell the difference between this and some of the other dangerous members of the family. With common hogweed, you can see the seed casings are quite flat, and they're like a disc with the seed in the middle and then two wings on the side. And common hogweed is a really common plant in the UK. You can find it almost everywhere, and you get a lot of seeds on each plant. So here's a plant that's more common in urban environments in the UK as a escaped garden plant, but you do occasionally find it in the wild. I'm just having a walk through the woodlands here along this path, and I've come across this here. This is pheasant berry or Himalayan honeysuckle, and the berries of this plant are really delicious. They kind of taste like caramel, but you only want to eat the berries when they're perfectly ripe. You see these ones here are still quite bright coloured. These are underripe and they taste really disgusting. So leave these ones alone and wait until they go a nice deep dark purple colour like this. You really can't mistake this plant for anything else. The berries grow in tiers and they're separated by these purple bracts. They're very distinctive looking. And yeah, these are the berries here when they're nice and soft and a very dark colour. And trust me, these really taste like caramel. Oh wow, really nice. But these unripe ones, they're really bitter. I've only ever tried them once, I'll never try them again. This is another Himalayan honeysuckle bush here. I don't fancy walking through all these brambles to get to it though, but you can see it's full of the berries.